Right now we're on one of the northernmost islands in Vanuatu chain, and before it became its independence, it was known as the New Hebrides Island. Even though Vanuatu was never invaded by the Japanese, the Americans used it for a major supply base. Also, a number of airstrips for both bombers, fighters, and seaplanes were constructed out here. There were quite a large number of Americans. There was also a contingent of Australians and New Zealanders that were out here during the war. As I say, it was used as a supply base for operations in the Solomon Islands and then in Papua New Guinea and other parts of the South and Southwest Pacific theaters of war. One of the planes actually, if you can see that barrel out there, is the remains of an American aircraft that crashed there during the war. And out here in surrounding waters and also some of the smaller islands and also on the main island here where we're standing, there are also a number of aircraft wrecks. It wasn't that long ago that JPAC, now known as DPAA, this is the official body in the United States dedicated to recovering the remains of Americans who were killed in all the wars, especially in World War II, since there are still well over 70,000 Americans still listed as missing in action from World War II alone. Well, President Coolidge, see, the United States, like a lot of countries, just were not prepared for World War II. For example, in 1939, when the war started in Europe, the United States only had 2 transport ships. Now, as we got closer towards into 1940, 1941, and especially after Pearl Harbor, which was in December 1941, we were so short of military equipment of all types that we resorted to leasing and in some cases buying civilian ships. Things like tuna boats, as small as tuna boats, but also a lot of what were in those days referred to as liners. For example, the USS President Coolidge, as a civilian liner under what was then the President lines, was called SS President Coolidge. It was taken over by the US military and used even before Pearl Harbor for evacuating civilians from places such as the Philippines. Then once the United States entered the war, it was used to transport troops, and one of the places they were bringing troops was here to Vanuatu. The captain of the Coolidge didn't know is that minefields had been laid out around the harbor entrance to prevent Japanese submarines and surface ships from entering the harbor. But they failed to inform the captain of the Coolidge, and as a result, he sailed right through the minefield. One of them struck the engine room, killing one of the sailors down in the engine room, and another one struck towards the stern of the Coolidge. Now the captain, knowing that the ship was about to sink, tried to run it aground, but he ran it up on the reef, and it stayed there temporarily, and all the soldiers simply, to put it simply, walked off the ship and walked ashore. Aside from the engineman who was, the man in the engine room who was killed, there was one other casualty. There was a Captain Elwood. He was the captain of an artillery unit. He made it off the ship, and then once ashore learned that there were some men left in the infirmary or the hospital on the ship. So he went back on his own and helped evacuate all of them. But after evacuating the last of them, and before he could get off the ship, apparently the Coolidge slipped off the reef and into deep water, and he was killed. It was only a few years ago that divers went down and recovered his remains, and they were eventually identified, and almost 75 years later, his funeral was held. I'd say it's important because it was a major staging area for a lot of the battles that were fought in the immediate area. It was an important supply base. And I think there's a lot of history here that still hasn't been properly researched and written about.